Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon. It's nice to have you with us, Justin.
Yes.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Louise.
Hi there.
Sorry for being a couple of minutes late. Technology didn't want to play nicely with us. But here we are. All right. So I think let's get started with this. Justin, thank you so much for joining us, and we are very interested to hear what you've got to tell us about the Vision260, especially in terms of market access. But I'm curious, what was the feedback from the road shows about everything that's happening in terms of Vision260?
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Louise, for this opportunity. Yeah, we've just had two weeks of road shows where we go out as staff out into the field and have meetings in all the different citrus growing regions. So I took half the team, and Paul Hardman took the other half. I went up to Mpumalanga and Limpopo, what we call the Senwes area, Groblersdal, Marble Hall, and then Nelspruit and Orneberg for the first week. And the second week I was in the Eastern Cape. People are generally very positive about the season. Definitely the crop is there. There's been adequate rain in most areas. The dams are pretty full. So everybody's anticipating a good crop this year. We'll know better in March. I think it's the 20th of March when we have our citrus marketing forum, exactly what the crop will be. But thus far, everybody's feeling pretty positive.
And what did they say? What did they say all about the logistical challenges and everything that Mitchell's been sharing with everybody?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think top of mind amongst all the growers is the logistics. Everybody witnessed the crumbling of logistics towards the end of last year. I mean, we were very lucky in the citrus industry in that we seem to have got through the season pretty well. And then in November and December, January, things came very much unstuck. And for the table grape growers and the stone fruit growers, it was a real disaster. So everybody's aware of that, and I think they're really keen to make sure that we are ready for our season, which kicks off in a couple of months' time. In terms of big volumes, there are small volumes at the moment of lemons and other products going out, but the real volumes start, more end of April, May. And so obviously we need to make sure that we're ready when those bigger volumes start coming through.
Interesting.
Yes. So having a big harvest is fantastic, but you still have to get it through the ports and to the market.
Yeah, that's the challenge.
Indeed.
Okay, so Justin, when you're ready, you can start. If you just want to tell us what you are going to be discussing with us, and then just let me know when I must put the PowerPoint up, and then, yeah, I think everybody's sitting with bated breath to hear everything.
No, great, thanks. So I think Mitchell's given you a pretty good rundown on the logistics side. So we've got the 5 core projects and 3 cross-cutting projects under Vision260. And I'm going to go through this afternoon a little bit of background as to how we got to 260 and what that number means and where the vision was born. And then perhaps some of the work that we're doing on the first project, which is all about market demand. So I think you can put the PowerPoint up, and then I will go through. And unfortunately, the technology is not working from my side, so I'll have to ask you just to go
No
on.
worries.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. So we can go to the first slide, or the next slide. Yeah, so I think most people know about where we rank in terms of the global citrus export. So we're number 2 in the world after Spain. In terms of the different types of citrus, we're the biggest export in the world of grapefruit. We're number 3 for both lemons and oranges, and number 5 for soft citrus. So soft citrus, or mandarins, as people prefer to call it now, is the most competitive of our different categories. And what I'll do now is just take you through those different categories and what we anticipate going forward.
I've got a question. I've got a question. That second place, is that overall number of tons, all collectively put together?
Yes, correct. Yeah, so that's the total citrus. Yeah,
we're not very far ahead of Turkey if I look at this.
no, Turkey, and in fact, 23-4 season, we might find Turkey coming even closer, or maybe even overtaking us. They've got a huge crop on the trees towards the end of last year, and obviously they sort of coming towards the end of their season now. But they had a really big volume, and in fact, interestingly enough, Turkey for the first time on a production point of view. So these are exports we're looking at here, but on a production point of view, Turkey actually overtook Spain last year. So definitely,
Wow.
It is a country that's got a lot of citrus.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
And I see that South Africa, the only other Southern Hemisphere countries that are on this list are Chile and Argentina, and they are way down. So for us, the Southern Hemisphere advantage is there.
No, definitely. So if you just look at the Southern Hemisphere, South Africa dominates the space, and that's a huge plus for us. And if you have a look at those other countries, Argentina's only really in lemons and mandarins, and Chile's there in oranges and mandarins. And Chile mostly goes to the US, and Argentina mostly US and a bit of Europe. So we're very competitive in terms of the Southern Hemisphere.
Wow. And where's all Turkey's lemons go, all Turkey's citrus going, if you're saying that they've actually surpassed Spain in terms of production?
Well, Turkey is very well placed geographically. They can move their fruit into Europe very easily, being on the Mediterranean. Then they're right there in the Middle East, so they can go into the Middle Eastern countries, and not far away from Asia either. So I know the Red Sea problems now will impact that, because it's not so easy to get through into Asia from their region. But in normal years, when you don't have these conflicts, they're pretty well placed to get their fruit anywhere around the world.
Wow.
Okay, so I'm going to go through each of these different categories. By far, our biggest growth is in mandarins. So in 2022, we looked at what we were exporting then, which was about 31.8 million cartons. And if you click on the next one, you'll see that by 2027, so what we've done is we've broken up it into 5-year chunks. So the first 5 years until 2027. And you'll see it goes up by 22.7 million cartons, which is the equivalent of 340,000 tons. So that's a lot more mandarins coming. Just on the right-hand side, you'll see revision. So I'll explain a bit further on the Vision260 and how we got to that. But we've revised those numbers to a certain extent. So the original model was showing 66.5 million cartons, and that's now been decreased. And that's largely to do with sentiment. In the industry until 2021, growers were pretty much planting any spare land to citrus. They were putting netting up, a lot of investment going into the planting of citrus in general, and in mandarins in particular. But 2022 and 2023 sorry, 2021 and 2022 were pretty difficult seasons for the citrus industry. The economics of citrus farming came under pressure, and so that sentiment has turned around a bit. If you go back 2 years ago, you had to be on a waiting list of 3 or 4 years to get some of the mandarin varieties that you wanted. Now you can walk into a nursery and buy a tree. So definitely the demand for planting material, budwood, etc., has really decreased, and we're not seeing the plantings that we saw before 2021. And then we've also got, if you click on the next one, Devos, and that just shows you where we're going to 2032. So our Vision260 is a 10-year vision, taking us from 2022 all the way through to 2032. And there we see that we're anticipating 69.7 million cartons by 2032. So that's a big increase in the mandarin sector.
So that's more than double.
Yeah, exactly.
I've got a question. Is the revised numbers that you've got here is quite a bit lower than the initially estimated. Did growers remove trees? Did they cut trees down? Because obviously, if trees are in the ground, they're gonna grow and they're gonna produce somewhere.
Yeah, so the model it takes into account anticipated future plantings, etc., as well, working on previous plantings. So it's not just what's in the ground; it also anticipates what people will do with the additional hectares of citrus and new plantings, etc. So when the sentiment turned around, that model indicated that people weren't. Part of the model is the budwood sales and the tree sales from nurseries, etc. And we saw that dropping significantly. So the model then had to be revised and gave us these numbers, which, as you say, brings us a lot lower than the original numbers.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And the word on the street, what's happening? Are there people still sitting thinking that maybe if the logistics and everything pick up and all that they will continue planting again?
Well, I mean, we drove around the Eastern Cape last week, and I must say I can see Vision260 happening before our eyes there. There's a lot of young trees in the ground coming through. Now that will build up, as Louis said. Now it's a doubling of the mandarin production in the next 10 years, and I mean, if the economics turns around, then we might see, renewed interest in additional plantings, bringing more hectares under citrus fruit. One must also remember the other big factor is water. So to a large extent, people have used up most of the water allocations in a lot of the citrus growing regions. So there's not a lot of spare water around for additional plantings. But you could find people switching from one product to another product and using that same water. And that will all just really be around whether the economics of citrus farming improves or not.
Interesting.
Okay.
Very cool. Can I move on?
So if you go into the next one, the next, so that just breaks down Satsumas, Clems, and Mandarins. So you'll see that's the three categories. Satsuma is very early citrus variety. There's only 5,000 tons extra being planted there. But if you look where the real growth is, it's in the late Mandarin categories, which are your sort of preferred fruit towards the end of the season. So not much growth in Sats or Clems. Right, then we go to oranges. Oranges are by far our biggest category. We normally break them up into navels and Valencias. 81.6 million cartons in 2022. And then if you go to the next one, you'll see by 2027, another 6.2 million cartons, or an additional 93,000 tons. And then the 2032 number at about an additional 14.2, taking us up to over 100 million cartons of oranges. So there's steady growth in oranges. Oranges are interesting commodity in that it is really a commodity. People buy oranges mostly for the Valencia type oranges, which is 50 million or 55 million of the 81 million. So Valencia's is by far our biggest variety, but there's a huge demand for Valencia's, specifically in Europe, for juicing purposes. And then obviously the other type of oranges is navel oranges, which is about 28 million cartons. And that, navel oranges competes to a large extent with mandarins because they're both eating fruit. And I think the convenience in the mandarin sector means that more people are purchasing mandarins because it's easier to peel, it's easier to put in lunch boxes. You're not left with a whole lot of juice on your hands when you've peeled a mandarin. So, we have seen that to a large extent, navels have been pretty flat for the last few years, and Valencias, as you see, there is some growth, but if you look at that as a percentage, it's nothing near the huge growth that we see in the mandarin sector.
If I've got a question on that, like you've said that, and please correct me if I'm wrong. If I understand correctly, Valencias are largely used in the processing sector in Europe, or is it also for eating? Do you know roughly about what that kind of split could be between eating and processing?
you're pretty much talking about juicing. So we talk about, for instance, pretty much all of that is juice, but it's not necessarily juiced at home. So a lot of it goes into juicing machines. If you go into restaurants, if you go into cafes, etc., in Europe, you'll find those round machines that pop these fruit into, and it squeezes it on the spot. Now, there's a lot of those machines in Europe, and fortunately, the size of our fruit, the size of our Valencias is perfect. Where we peak is perfect for those machines. So we really do well in Europe in terms of the juicing fruit.
Okay. Here's my next question on joining on top of that. So is there a possible big market for exporting already processed juice from South Africa? And the next thing is, do they have to be like in pristine condition? Because if you look at the export markets and sorters and graders, they only put the pristine fruit through for export. But if I'm listening to that, they could take, for instance, something that has got a bit of cosmetic damage to it.
Yeah, so to answer your first question, Brazil dominates the juice market. They're the biggest orange producer in the world, and they juice 99% of their product, and they do it very cheaply and very cost effectively, and we'll never compete on the juice market with Brazil. And then USA is number 2. So we do have juicing plants in South Africa, but generally we can't really compete with those countries. Most of that's just consumed on the local market, and also the quality of our juice. Because we farm the fruit for export, we obviously use plant protection products, etc., that will then end up in the juice. So that does make it a little bit more difficult to market. Your second question, unfortunately, the standards that we have to comply with, the PPCB quality standards and the phytosanitary standards are the same, regardless of whether it's going into juicing or not. We did, and we're probably going to retry again. We did try for a dispensation in Europe to allow the juicing fruit to go with some of the phytosanitary issues, as long as it was earmarked and going straight into a processing plant and therefore wouldn't pose a risk. But that wasn't completed. So we still got to relook at that and see whether it's worth reopening that and trying to get some of the juicing fruit through that channel and therefore not have to meet the strict phytosanitary compliance requirements.
Okay, because we've seen in some of the pack houses the bulk bins, especially on grapefruit, that goes to, I think Japan takes quite a bit of it, that then gets processed on their side into cosmetics and wherever that they use it.
Yeah, so a lot of Chinese fruit goes through in bulk bins to processing plants over in China, but that fruit still needs to meet the requirements. Just the packaging that's different. Yeah.
But it's cosmetically, like it might have some wind damage on it, or so it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, beautiful fruit.
Yeah, so you do get class 1, class 2, and processing purpose fruit, PP fruit. So that fruit that you would have seen with the blemishes, etc., would be your PP fruit, which isn't in the class 1 or class 2 range.
Interesting.
Very interesting. Okay,
right, so we can move on to lemons. So lemons is another big growth factor. People were planting a lot of lemons recently. A lot of the lemon orchards are very young. So you might notice that the volume of lemons is very similar to the volume of mandarins at the moment, 34.7. There we see a 9.6 million carton increase over the next 5 years, taking us up to 44.3. And then it pretty much flattens after that, just 2.3 million cartons additional up to 2032. So lemons will increase from 34 up to 46, 47 million cartons. So a bit of growth initially, but thereafter it flattens out. There's not a lot of new plantings, lemons at the moment. Lemons, for those who did economics, it's a product that you can double the price of lemons and the people will buy the same amount, or you can halve the price of lemons and people will buy the same amount. So Because if a housewife goes to buy lemons, he or she will go and buy 4 lemons a week, and they'll use 4 lemons a week. If you double the price, they'll still buy 4 lemons, and if you halve it, they'll still buy 4 lemons, because you don't eat lemons like you eat perhaps other fruit types. So yeah, that's the fact with lemons. So it's very difficult to get rid of a surplus. What you've got to find with lemons is new users, so new people that haven't used lemons before coming in and using lemons, or new uses. We did a big study in Saudi Arabia where we found that they use lemons to disinfect the surface of their kitchen. So they cut them in half and they clean the surface of their kitchens with half a lemon, and that's a new use that people could. As you was talking about earlier, the lemons that don't look all that good, perhaps, and you wouldn't want to put into your gin and tonic or onto your fish, you can perhaps cut that in half and use it to clean your kitchen, etc. So, that's one opportunity, perhaps, to increase the usage of lemons.
Well, what we do is in our house is exactly like you say. Luckily, we know people that grow lemons, so we can normally get them for free. But we put half a lemon in a dishwasher, and you don't get that horrible dishwasher smell afterwards.
Yeah, they're a very versatile fruit, and I think there's a lot of uses where people can perhaps promote them better for those other uses.
We should do a couple of TikToks, Louise, and of lemon uses.
Yes. They might need that. Okay. Interesting.
Okay, then the last one is grapefruit, and here we don't see a lot of growth. So we see it sticking at 16.7 million cartons, and then even coming down. Whether it does come down or not, we'll have to see. The model showing it coming down. I know that we have these different variety focus groups. So we have a grapefruit variety focus group. And they're thinking of putting in a market development program, to try and encourage people to carry on consuming grapefruit. I mean, I don't know if you eat grapefruit, but I love grapefruit. It's probably shouldn't say this, but it's my favorite citrus fruit. It's just an amazing taste, and it was interesting. In 2010, we did a promotion campaign in the UK, and what we did was we gave 30 housewives a grapefruit a day for 30 days, and they kept a diary as to how they felt, and whether they had more energy, and whether their hair felt better, and whether their skin felt better, and whether they lost weight, and whether all those sort of things. And it was absolutely amazing, the positive attributes of grapefruit. Every single one of them were in the 90s in terms, 90% in terms of feeling better energy, and et cetera. So it is a fantastic fruit. I know it has got some problems in terms of the way it impacts on medication, etc. So I know there are some areas that aren't great, but there are new types of grapefruit that are being bred now that actually don't impact on medication. But and the other point about it is that the reason why it impacts on medication, it actually causes your body to take up more of the medication, and that's why they don't like you eating the grapefruit. Whereas, in fact, if you'd eaten grapefruit from when you were young, you probably wouldn't need medication at all.
Yes, so you probably wouldn't need that medication. I think from what I understand and will remember, it impacts blood pressure medication.
Yeah, there are a few different types of medication, but definitely blood pressure is one of them. Yeah.
But it's a fantastic fruit. I agree. I love it.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so we're hoping that we'll save grapefruit. As you saw earlier, we're the only export of grapefruit in the southern hemisphere at the moment. So we have the market to ourselves to a large extent, and there are some interesting markets like South Korea, which were starting to show really big increases in grapefruit consumption, especially amongst the younger people. But we do have some phyto issues there, some of the pests that we're battling to control for South Korea. But that was one market that was starting to increase. And in Japan, they consume a lot of grapefruit with alcohol. So you find it in the pubs, etc. So hopefully we'll be able to turn this around and actually get some increase in going forward.
I've also on the grapefruit topic, like I had a conversation with my brother-in-law like a couple of months ago, and he said, grapefruit, that's a horrible thing. And I think it's a connotation that we've had from growing up kids. It was this bitter fruit that nobody liked. But the varieties that's out now, I think people just don't know how great it is. They still got that negative connotation from when they were kids and their parents gave it to them when they were naughty. So I think people just don't know how great it tastes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when we were brought up, we had white grapefruit growing in the yard, and you used to cut that in half and put spoonfuls of sugar on it. Now, I mean, these varieties, Star Ruby grapefruit is an amazing piece of fruit. This red-fleshed grapefruit, and you definitely don't need any sugar. It's definitely sweet enough to eat on its own. So I agree with you. It is those old connotations, and I just don't know how you sort of force people to eat grapefruit and realize that they're actually missing out on something.
Well, I think if we can talk about that topic, I think just to educate them, put it down on a you must go to something like a big farmers market and just have a stand there and say, come and taste. What do you like? This is a mandarin. This is a lime. Here's a Valencia. Here's a navel, and here's a grapefruit. But have the nice stuff there. And I think the people will be pleasantly surprised.
No, I agree.
Louise, we must make TikToks.
Yes.
Okay,
we should do that. Okay.
So that takes you through the different types of citrus. So if you have a look at this graph here, the red line is the original 260. So that's what that we came up with when you put all the numbers into the model in 2021 when you looked at it. And then the revised one is the green line. So the green line, if you look to 2032, goes up to about 230 million cartons now, and not up to the 260 million cartons that we had. And in the next 5 years, up to 2027, it goes up to just over 200 million, to about 203 million cartons. Now, remembering that we export about 165 million at the moment, if you go up to 260, you're talking about extra 100 million cartons in the next 10 years, which is roughly 10 million cartons a year on average. So it's a huge increase. And even if you go up to 230 million cartons, you're still speaking about a 70 million carton increase. So it's not insignificant, and there's a lot more fruit. And when we at the CGA board, when we looked at these numbers, originally a lot of the CGA directors were really worried about this and said, this is going to be a disaster. The ports are going to fall down, the roads won't manage it, there's not enough warehousing, etc., etc. And we're going to get into the markets, and the markets are all going to be saturated or oversaturated and oversupplied. So, but then some of the directors turned around and said, no, let's flip that around and say, what if we can sell 260 or 230 in 10 years' time? What will that mean to us as an industry? The mass of fruit that we'll have, which will increase all of our infrastructure and make us a formidable industry in the country. It'll add to the economy. It'll add a huge amount of jobs. It'll bring in a lot of foreign exchange, and it'll make us, a part of the economy that is really significant. And so we turned it around and said, okay, so what are we going to, if we say, let's try and get to 260, what do we need to do to get us to 260? And then that's where Vision260 was born, to say, what do we actually need to do to be able to sell 260 million cartons in 10 years' time? And if you go to the next slide, you'll see the different projects. Sorry, the one after. Yeah.
Mr. This one, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I've got a question before we carry on here.
Sure.
What's happening in other countries? What's happening in Turkey and Spain that is sitting right next to us?
Yeah, so I mean, firstly, remember that Turkey and Spain and the northern hemisphere countries are all counter-seasonal to us, so they don't really impact on us, except perhaps what we call the shoulders of the season, the beginning and the end, to a certain extent. But there has been planting everywhere. I mean, we're not the only ones who had good citrus exporting conditions, but in say from 2002 until the more recent time. So we've had a lot of really good export seasons, and so have the others. So there has been additional planting. If you look in the southern hemisphere, our main competitors are South America, into the US and that area. So we've seen increases in Chile. We've seen increases in Peru, particularly. Argentina have had some rough years. The politics there hasn't been great. Their government has let them down to a certain extent. Their water issue is quite a big issue, as is the water issue in Chile, if you've been looking at any of those documentaries. So the water is their biggest problem, but they've expanded in South America. And then the other big competitor is Australia, but that's mostly into Asia. Obviously, they've got a geographic advantage going to Asia. They're on the same time as the Asians. So for them to do business is a lot easier than for us. But Australia is, a very high cost producer, very high labor costs, and some of the other costs are very high as well. So we can compete quite effectively in Asia. But to answer your question, yes, there's been planting pretty much everywhere, and so the total volume of citrus has increased. But there have also been weather events around the world which impact every year. And so some years you see big decreases in some of those that have those weather events. We're very fortunate here in South Africa in that we produce our fruit across a very wide geographical range. So right from Messina up on the Zimbabwe border all the way through to Robertson and that in the Boland, and then across from the Orange River all the way across to Nkwaleni and KZN. So, if you have a weather event and one area is impacted, you'll find the other areas will pick up the slack and be able to produce and fill that gap. And we've seen that, for example, Potensi, I mean, they were down to 9% of their normal water, and somehow managed to keep their crops alive. Thank goodness the dam is now spilling last year, and it's 92% full at the moment. So, things change, but I think we're very blessed in South Africa to have such a wide range of growing areas, and therefore we can fill the basket pretty much every year.
And also the other countries have got quite a bit to catch up to us if we look back at those numbers in the beginning.
Yeah, they don't have the mass that we have, the critical mass that drives your industry forward. And I must say, the other areas, we have amazing technology in our country. Growers have invested heavily into research from the 1970s, and therefore I believe that we have the best citricultural experts in the world. In South Africa, they get called to go and present in the US and all around the world. And that's driving the technology, and perishable products exports is not easy. It's a difficult game with all the pests and diseases that one has to contend with all the phytosanitary issues that everybody throws at you. So technology is definitely the area that makes wise investment.
Interesting. Okay. Let's carry on.
Good. So these are the 8 projects. The first 5 are cross-cutting. Mitchell's already, I think, dealt with project 2, 3, and 4. And what we're dealing with now is the project 1, which is where is this fruit going to be marketed? So we know from the previous few slides how much fruit we have available. Now we've got to decide where we're going to market that fruit and what we have to do. And then projects 6, 7, and 8 are all cross-cutting projects. So the first one, stakeholder alignment, to get everybody on the same page. The next is around communication, to keep communicating throughout the next 10 years as we face different challenges and opportunities. And then information is key to make sure that everybody has got the latest information. So I'm going to expand a bit then on that first project, which is the market demand. And if we go to the next slide. So if we look at what we did was we took each one and we looked at where's the fruit going at the moment. So where's South Africa sending our fruit, and then where are the rest of the world sending their fruit? So in other words, is our distribution spread similar to that's exported by the world? And that'll tell us where we perhaps underrepresented and where we overrepresented. Next slide. So then we looked at where do we send our mandarins at the moment, and by far most of it's to European Union. And you can see the sort of top 5 countries take the bulk of the fruit. The question is, I think you've heard about the story about the guy who's going to sell shoes, and they go across to some country in the desert, and one guy writes back and says, nobody's wearing shoes here, there's no market. And the other guy writes back and says, there's nobody wearing shoes here, there's a huge market here. So, we don't know much about markets here at CGA, so we enlisted the help of the Fresh Produce Exporters Forum. We sat with their exporters for a long time trying to say, where are we going to send these mandarins, And we've got whatever it is, 30 million extra cartons in the next 10 years. Let's work out where those 30 million cartons are going to go, and so they helped us a lot in terms of understanding where the distribution would be.
And may you mention some of those markets you're going to be looking at targeting?
Yeah, so in mandarins, the one is Japan. At the moment, we only have access in Japan for clementines. They've got a very strange rule that they do it variety by variety. So, and everybody tells us there's a big opportunity for mandarins into Japan apart from clementines. So we're working on that now. The other big one is the US. We only have access from the Western Cape and the Northern Cape to the US at the moment. But they've taken a liking to mandarins. They've got a massive domestic industry of mandarins. A lot of people invested heavily into mandarins in California and that. But they need to fill their shelves during their off season, and some of the brands there want to make sure that you can get good quality fruit year round in their brands. So they've been across South Africa. They know what our fruit looks like. They're importing some from the Western Cape at the moment, and they see huge potential for the other areas of South Africa to fill up their boxes as well during the off season. So definitely the US, another one. Asia is probably the biggest one for mandarins. We haven't really been into Asia in a big way. You'll see there, it's not even on the list there. Bangladesh is the first country you get to, and that's about number 6 or so, and then China. So if you could get the same consumption as the UK or the EU in those Asian countries, there's a lot of potential there in Asia for more mandarins to go into those markets. So those are the ones we're looking at in terms of mandarins. But what we've got is a schedule now. So we sort of played Big Brother and said, okay, we've got to, in the next 5 years, this is how many tons are going to go into each of these markets, and then we monitor that each year. But what that gives us is it gives us our marching orders in terms of who we need to engage with about these different things. So Japan, for example, the wider access, that's a government-to-government negotiation. Our Department of Agriculture needs to sit with Japan MAF and discuss this and negotiate that additional or the wider types of mandarins that we can send into Japan. So these figures, what it gives us is something to work on and some real research that we can take to department and say, this is where you need to help us in terms of that. So the wider access to the US, also very much government to government, the Japan story, and then into Asia, those different countries.
Justin, are these matters underway already? Is our government speaking to Japan about more access for mandarins, or do we have to wait for a certain period of time for that to happen?
What is sitting in a queue?
Yeah, so if you look at Japan, they do one product at a time. So they were dealing with avocados until last year, and that got approved last year. So we were next on the list. So they're now dealing with our citrus issues in Japan now. In the US, it's been very unfortunate. Our our access there, wider access is tied up with meat products. So the US want to send their pork to South Africa, and they believe that our requirements, our South African requirements on their pork imports are unjustified and not technically justified. So there's a big discussion going on around meat products, and the lobbyists in Washington have basically said to USDA APHIS that they are not to allow our access until the pork issue has been sorted out. So, yeah,
Okay.
unfortunately, that's world politics, and it's tit for tat type stuff. So, but those are in place, and in terms of some of the Asian countries, other Asian countries, Vietnam, the final protocol for oranges is almost complete now. And then they'll work on mandarins. Vietnam, also a strange way of operating. They do each citrus category one at a time, whereas most countries do citrus as a whole. So oranges is going to be complete very soon, and then we'll move on to mandarins. And in India, the big thing there is in-transit cold treatment, which we're also dealing with their government on to try and allow us to do in-transit cold treatment. So
because a lot of these. The Indian, they want fumigation at this stage, if I'm correct.
They give you alternatives. So you can either do land-based cold treatment or you can do fumigation. But for citrus fruit, we do fumigate, but it's not great for the shelf life of the fruit, and we'd rather do in-transit cold treatment like we do to every other country in the world.
Okay.
Interesting.
Good. We can move to the next one. I think it just gives you the per capita consumption. So, I mean, this helps us also guide us as to which countries perhaps one can promote your fruit into more and hopefully lift the consumption of easy peelers. So you can see USA, was always very low, 3.4, I think it is kgs. And if you go up to Russia, there's 4.1. So I think it was 6.1 countries, now 6.1. So,
yeah.
So you can see that if you try and lift the consumption in some of these countries where the consumption is pretty low, there might be some opportunities there. Having said that, we've never really been in the market development game before in terms of promotions. We've never done promotions. We don't have a mandate to do it. But the question is the 100 million cartons going to sell itself, or do you have to do something to actually push it a bit? So we are asking our variety focus groups to give us some guidance around this, because market development costs money, and at the end of the day, somebody will need to pay for that sort of developmental work.
Justin, if I may ask, why has CGA never been involved with the marketing of the fruit?
Yeah, it's to do with funding. So if you go to our board, half of them believe that market development is a good idea, and half of them don't believe it's a good idea. And also many of them feel that it's not the responsibility of the grower to market or to develop the markets. It's the responsibility of the exporter or the export agent to actually do that. So there's different views in the CGA as to whose responsibility it is and whether it actually pays at the end of the day. So until we've exhausted that debate, and let me tell you, our board members, board meetings, we've had many hours of debate on this subject. It's back on the table for debate again. So we'll see where that takes us.
Good luck.
Yes.
Right. So if we move on to lemons, similar type of situation, looking at where we send our lemons, you'll see we're very dependent upon the Middle East and Europe. So Middle East is a really exciting place for us. We do believe there's potential for even more lemons into the Middle East. And you can see that we whereas we send 29%, the world only sends 11%. So we're very overrepresented in the Middle East. But the others are pretty much on target. So yeah, lemons, will probably continue in that sort of distribution into the future. And then the next one,
we've got very small amounts of lemons going to Asia and China and Southeast Asia. So that's also probably something you're working on, increasing that market.
Yeah, so lemon's an interesting thing in that it doesn't take cold treatment too well. So you know, and all of our most of our Asian markets are cold treatment markets. So in other words, you have to ship at -0.6 degrees. And a lemon, if you take it below 2 degrees, it's not happy, and you should actually probably ship it at sort of 7 degrees even. So until we've sorted out the cold treatment protocols, Asia is going to be difficult. You might remember 2 or 3 years ago, the minister managed to get us across the line in terms of China and changing the Chinese import requirements for lemons. And that means that lemons are starting to grow into China now. We'll see those numbers starting to really increase as we get that network sorted out. So the reason for that is that the cold treatments of -0.6 are due to false codling moth, and the lemon is not a host of false codling moth. Thank goodness. So we got the Chinese to agree to that. The Europeans already agreed to that. That's why lemons are not on the FCM requirements in terms of the measures to the EU. And so what we're working on now is getting the other countries to agree that the lemon's not a host. So countries like Thailand and Philippines, etc., we need to work on those countries to get them to take FCM off the quarantine pest list of lemons, and then we'll be able to perhaps increase that Asian volume.
Interesting.
I remember from when we did the inspections with you guys is that the lemons are not the FCM they don't live in the lemons.
Yeah.
And on lemons, because it's got such a wide variety of uses, what's the possibility of exporting processed lemons, increasing that market?
Yeah, I mean, once again, I'm not a boffin on process side, but there definitely is. We do actually export a lot of lemon oil, a lot of lemon juice, etc. You might remember a few years ago, the US brought in anti-dumping duties against South African lemon juice. And when I looked at the numbers, I was quite astounded at how much lemon juice we actually were exporting to the US. So it's not insignificant, and we are already doing that, but we don't have the sort of plants in place like Argentina. So Argentina's their big game is processed. The big like Coke and Pepsi, and that they use a lot of lemons in their juice or their cool drinks. And so you know, if we could attract one of those big players into the country to put up a processing plant for Coke or Pepsi, I think we would see, you know, a lot more going into that line.
It's actually
so we
weird.
have a different, yeah. Sorry.
It's actually weird that one of those big players have not invested really, because if you look at, there's already potato growers growing for PepsiCo, and they're already here. So I think if they're big players in that market overseas, why not here?
It's basically, our focus has always been on fresh, and I think that's why. I mean, the growers have always believed that fresh brings you the biggest return, which it does at the moment. But you know, a processing sector would allow you to sort of always ensure that you had a market for excess fruit. So you know, I think that it's something that would be beneficial for the industry. But it's there have been some initiatives that have failed in the past, but it could happen in the future.
Yeah, one of my connections, they've got quite a big lemon production block or two down here in close to Worcester. Last year they dumped tons of lemons because it was wrong size, wrong color. The hawkers didn't want it. There was too much. There was simply too much.
Yeah.
So they literally dumped tons of it into a hole and covered it up.
Yeah, so definitely, if we had a processing sector, it would. I mean, there was a lot dumped around the country, so I think that, you know, there'd be a huge advantage. But it's an area we don't really get involved in as CGA.
Interesting. Okay. Very cool. Should I move on, or do you still want to talk about this?
Yeah. So the next, I think, is the next slide. Is the okay? That just shows you the lemon EU exports and going into the EU, and you'll see South Africa. There's a red line. So we've just over the period 2012-13 up till now, just been expanding our lemons into the EU, and other countries have. Some of them have increased slightly, but nothing to the extent of South Africa. You'll see the Turkey figure, the blue line. You were asking about Turkey earlier. So, Turkey's also started to really export bigger volumes into the EU as well.
The thing that's very obvious there is how the Argentinian exports have really come down quite considerably.
Yeah. And that's mostly water related. They just haven't had the crop there to keep going.
Okay.
And so it's also phytosanitary related. The Argentinians have really battled with citrus black spot and at times been closed out of the EU market, and so they've had to look at alternatives.
Okay.
How big is the lemon market in Spain, for instance?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to know where lemons go. If you're talking about production, they're big on production, but if you're talking about demand, it's very difficult to know where lemons go once they get into Europe. They move around without you being able to really tag where they've gone.
Okay.
So this shows you the consumption, and you can see that it's much more it's not as wide as the other products, because, as we said earlier, lemons aren't consumed, like a snack or anything like that. It's pretty much utilized for as a condiment more than anything else. So, but it does give you an idea of which countries are pretty low and which countries are high in terms of per capita consumption. The other interesting thing about lemons is the relation between lemons and limes. So a lot of international figures show lemon and lime together, and some countries like Mexico, India, etc., big on limes, but they don't do any lemons, and we do lemons, but we don't do much in the way of limes. There are a few little projects that are going on now with limes, but we mostly concentrate lemons, and the reason is because our limes tend to go yellow or orange, and if you go into a shop to buy limes, you want dark green limes. That's how you expect to buy them. So because of our climate, we battle to give good quality limes.
So who's the main producer of limes?
Mexico is huge, and India is huge on limes, and I'm probably forgetting a couple others, but those are the countries that really do. I mean, if you look at the US, they import huge amounts of limes from Mexico, for example.
So mentioning those two countries, I presume a warm, dry climate for them, not too much cold units.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So somebody like Botswana, Zimbabwe, or Namibia could actually maybe get something going.
I think they might. You don't have many areas in that don't get some sort of cold temperature, in winter. So I think their winters be too cold, and the color break would occur in their limes, unfortunately.
I've learned something new today.
Learning lots of new things.
Okay, then we move on to oranges. So same story, looking at where oranges around the world go, where our oranges go. Obviously, mostly Europe and the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and so pretty similar distribution of our oranges to global oranges. Oranges is a massive sector of citrus, so it's pretty much everybody produces them and everybody consumes them in some format or other. Next one. So once again, the EU, I think you'd have noticed in all the other slides, the EU is just such a big market for all of our citrus. And here you can see it in oranges. I mentioned earlier about the Valencia oranges going into their juicing programs in the shops, etc. So, if you look at 2022 2020 was an amazing year for oranges in Europe. For some reason or other, with COVID, everybody was eating oranges because of its perceived vitamin C and health benefits. And then in 2023, last year, once again, the orange price went through the roof in Europe again. And that was mostly due to the fact that the hemisphere got out of the market pretty early, and there weren't a lot of oranges to be found from the southern hemisphere. So we really benefited from that and had really good orange prices throughout the year. And in fact, if it hadn't been for the phytosanitary limitations where we had to close the market down in September, we probably could have sold another 5 million cartons of Valencias into that market. But we had to cut the market off, unfortunately. So yeah, orange is very dependent upon European Union, and then you can see the other countries. China, important market, Middle East, UAE mostly, and Saudi Arabia are the two countries that take most of our fruit in the Middle East. And then the one that will come up in all of them is Russia, and everybody's during the Russian invasion and all that was wondering how we still would be able to send our fruit to Russia. There was a lot of concerns around that, but in the last 2 years, there's been a vessel loading citrus every week in Durban and leaving on a weekly basis into St. Petersburg. So the Russian market has proved to be a very reliable market for our fruit. The Russian people still need to eat, and it's a food item, so it's not subject to the sanctions. And we, from what I've heard from exporters, the money flow hasn't been an issue, which was another concern that people had. So Russia is really, really important to us. And yeah, I can see it's the fourth biggest in terms of oranges.
Which one of these countries would the CGA like to increase in the near future as part of Vision260?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, Europe comes in all of them. So although we do send a lot into Europe, we do still see that there's growth potential, because if you look at consumption of citrus in their summer season, it's way below what they consume in winter. Now, I know that people consume citrus because of vitamin C and colds and flu, and you get those in winter. You don't get those in summer. But nevertheless, we do believe that there is potential to increase consumption in their summer. And then the Asian countries, all those Asian countries I think are underrepresented in terms of what we could probably send into those markets if we worked on them a bit harder, improved some of the access conditions and that.
Very cool.
Okay.
Should I skip?
Yeah. And then we just look at the consumption. So you got some right down the bottom end there, less than a kg per capita. And then going all the way up to Scandinavia, which, eating 6.5 kilograms per capita. So quite a widespread on oranges, and probably some potential to work on the lower groups. A lot of these figures come out of a report from CIRAD, the French research company that did work for the World Citrus Organization. And we're using this in the World Citrus Organization to say, where do we need to start raising awareness around different citrus types in these different countries to try and promote consumption there. So that gives you an idea of those countries.
Do they perhaps say why Scandinavia is so high up on the list?
I haven't seen the sort of any text behind that as to why they would have so much. You might find it's because they have longer, colder periods, and therefore consume a lot longer than perhaps people in the areas that turn warm pretty quickly. At the bottom end there, Japan, they eat a lot of mandarins. They produce quite a lot of mandarins themselves in hot houses. So they produce them all year round, and I think Japan's probably got more varieties of mandarins than anybody else, and they produce really good mandarins. So I think you probably find that they don't really consume oranges because they consume so much mandarins.
I must say that with my house, I'm not a big orange consumer. I eat cara oranges, and that's about it, because they're the only nice tasting ones for me. My personal opinion.
No, you need to be educated. There's a lot of good oranges, but I just find them more difficult to eat. That's the only reason why I prefer mandarins.
Yes.
But
Yes.
but they do have a unique taste, and if you get really good oranges, you can't really beat them for refreshing. That's why we used to have them at halftime at rugby matches, because they'd give you a bit of a jolt of energy, etc. So
For sure.
there's good orange. Yeah.
Justin, thanks very much for outlining this. If you go back to how rapid the growth is expected to be, and all the development into new countries trying to open up markets, it's a little bit like it seems to me that this is a very urgent need. How is the citrus industry getting along with speaking to government and getting government to assist with opening these new markets? How are things moving along?
No, it's a difficult one. I mean, the government's got a number of different commodities that they have to look after. So, we understand that, and definitely capacity is a constraint. We have huge support from the minister and huge support from the director general. They both understand the importance of this for our country and for the industry. We do have challenges at official level where perhaps people aren't grasping. They understand their regulatory role, but they don't really understand their enabling role. So we really need them to understand that they can be enablers to make this happen. It's an ongoing engagement, and we shall continue to engage with them because they hold the key for the future.
Okay, and here's
that's good to know. And are there any, sorry, Dewald, are there any things that look like, it's maybe not easy for you to talk about them, but is there anything that looks like it's about to happen, like there's big breakthroughs on the near horizon that will enable this?
Yeah, definitely Vietnam's about to happen, so that we're very excited about, and it'll be in the press as soon as it's been signed off. We always hopeful about the US. We know that the talks are taking place, and so we are hopeful that because that'll be a really big one for us, the US access. So there's a lot on and what happens with these things is that suddenly it's signed and suddenly it's done. So you sort of sit and wait for 10 years and then it gets done. So we live in hope, and every day we hope to wake up and see something good on the emails coming in. But all of these things are happening. It's not as if everybody's sitting back waiting for somebody to do something. A lot of this is going on, and having said what I said, there are a lot of really people at department who are putting their shoulder to the wheel and really trying to make it happen. But geopolitics is not all that great at the moment for South Africa. There's a lot of issues that we're dealing with at political level that don't make us flavor of the month in some countries. So it does make it more challenging. But we just got to keep going.
On that topic is a controversial question, if I may ask, and you please feel free not to answer if you don't want to. Do you think that the coming elections and things turn to a more positive thing in South Africa, maybe a new government, that things could go quicker?
I don't think so, Dewald. I think these things take a long time, no matter who's in power. I mean, if you look at market access, you won't get a new market in less than 10 years. I haven't seen anybody open a market in less than 10 years. So that's just unfortunately the nature of the game that you're in. It's a whole long negotiating process. So I think, in my view, it will be same old, and we just got to work with whoever's in position.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. This has been extremely interesting. I've learned a great deal in the process. I don't think Dewald has, so I know the amount of questions he asked. I'm sure he's also learned. And thank you very much for joining us and for putting across this very important presentation. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity. And everybody's got a role to play in Vision260, so we'll chat to anybody. Thank you.
Yeah, and I must say we do get around a lot to a lot of different places, and seeing what's happening in the resilience of the farmers, I'm very hopeful for what's to come.
I agree. They're amazing people.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I suppose we can wrap up, but don't leave quite yet, because we can chat to you after we're no longer live. Is there anything you want to close off with, Justin?
No, I just think what I said earlier, everybody who's in the chain has got a role to play in Vision 260. The guys who make the cartons, are they going to be able to make 260 million cartons for us? The guys who make the pallet bases, the guys who make the stickers, everybody has got a role to play. So chat to us. If you need more information, we're available to discuss these things at any time. Thank you.
Yeah. Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justin. And for all the viewers, thank you for tuning in. If there's any questions, there was no questions that came through while we were talking, but please feel free to leave them. If there's anything specific to Justin, we'll pass it on to you. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.